I've always trusted the lines, contours of coasts, shifts in sandbars, the invisible grip of an undercurrent. You learn to read what most folks miss, because if you don't, someone gets lost. Or worse. The cottage creaked around me as I sat hunched over my drafting table, pencil in hand, though I hadn't drawn a line in an hour. Outside, the wind pressed against the salt-stained windows, whistling through the cedar siding like it was searching for a way in. The smell of brine and old paper filled the room, but something else tugged at me, a current beneath the calm. Clara wasn't home yet. Again. I glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. She'd texted earlier, stuck calibrating sensors. Don't wait up. That was the third late night this week. Maybe fourth. I rubbed the back of my neck, eyes trailing over a half-finished chart of shoals north of the peninsula. The lines I'd drawn were clean, confident, but something about them didn't sit right, much like Clara lately. It started small. Her boots. Usually, she came home with them caked in marsh mud, seaweed clinging to the soles. But last Tuesday, they were spotless. Not freshly clean, just untouched. Like they hadn't been worn at all. When I asked how the marsh was, she said, wet and cold, and kissed me quickly before disappearing into the shower. I wanted to believe her. I still do. But I catalog details for a living. You can't unsee what doesn't align. Her phone, too. It used to live on the kitchen counter, screen up, forgotten among takeout receipts and grocery lists. Now it's always with her. And it has a password. A new one. I noticed when it buzzed one night and I went to silence it. She snatched it from my hand, smiling too quickly, saying it was just junk mail. Clara doesn't get junk mail at 11:23 p.m. I tried to dismiss it. Told myself I was imagining things. That this was what happens when two people drift after years of routine. But that wasn't it. Not really. It was the way she avoided looking me in the eye when I asked about her day, or how she'd pause for just a second too long before answering a simple question. I remember when we used to walk the dunes behind the cottage, fingers intertwined, her voice bubbling as she described the symbiotic life of barnacles and whales. I used to sketch the coastline while she collected sea glass. She once said I was the only man she'd ever met who could draw a horizon straighter than he could walk it. I told her I'd learned from the tides, steady, but never quite the same. That made her laugh. But lately, that laugh, it's gone quiet. Then there was the comment. Last Thursday, I stopped by the harbor to drop off a repaired compass for one of the dockhands. I ran into Mark, one of Clara's colleagues from the lab. She's been logging some serious overtime with Nathan these days, he said offhandedly, gesturing toward the pier. Those two are thick as thieves. I blinked. Nathan. Yeah, new research partner. She didn't mention him. He tilted his head. Figured you'd know. I nodded like I did. That night, when Clara got home, I asked about her day. She said she was alone at the station, calibrating salinity sensors. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. That's when I drove past the university annex later that evening, telling myself I needed to return a book I'd borrowed. Her car was there. Lights were on in one of the upstairs labs. I didn't stop. I just sat in my truck and watched the silhouette of two figures moving around a room. One of them had her shape. The other moved closer, and then they both disappeared from view. The next morning, I found myself at Jonah's bait shop. It's little more than a converted shed with a rusted bell on the door and the scent of herring soaked into the floorboards. Jonah was tying flies behind a counter, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble for a man who once lost 3 of them to a snapped winch cable. You look like someone who's been staring at the sea too long, he said, not looking up. I poured myself a coffee from the metal urn in the corner. It tasted like burnt rope. Can I ask you something? Always. I leaned against the counter, watching a lobster trap sway slightly on its hook. Have you ever misread a sign? Thought you saw something that wasn't there? Jonah's brow furrowed. You mean like a weather shift? No. like in a person. He stopped tying. Ah, I told him softly about Clara, the clean boots, the locked phone, the name Nathan. I didn't accuse, just laid out the chart, the way I might map a current, tentative, unsure. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. Then he reached for an old ledger and flipped to a torn, yellowed page. "See this," he said, pointing to a faint sketch of a reef off Dogtooth Point. Wasn't marked on any map till a boat hit it. Sliced clean through the hull. I looked at him. "Sometimes," he said, "what you don't chart can still wreck you." The room was still. Just the buzz of a single fly against the window pane and the faint creak of the dock outside. "Trust your instincts, Elias," Jonah added quietly. "They've carried you further than you think." When I got home that evening, Clara wasn't there yet. The sun was low, casting amber streaks across the floorboards. I walked past her coat, still damp from the morning fog, and into the kitchen. That's when I heard it, her voice. The voicemail was still playing from the answering machine we kept by habit, even though no one used it much anymore. "Nathan, eh? Just making sure everything's set for tomorrow. Let's keep it quiet, okay? I'll handle Elias. He doesn't suspect anything." My breath caught. The machine clicked off. I stood there, the taste of iron rising in my mouth. And then I reached for the old compass on the shelf, an heirloom from my father. I held it in my palm, its needle trembling ever so slightly, just like I was. There's a silence in the marshlands that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not empty, not really. It's alive with whispers, the distant call of gulls, the drip of water off eelgrass, the soft churn of the tide pushing through the reeds. But beneath all that, there's a stillness, a kind of knowing quiet, as if the land's waiting for you to notice what it's hiding. That morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't have a plan, just a direction toward Clara's research station tucked deep in the fog-drenched wetlands. I told myself it was just to see, to understand. But the truth sat heavier than that. After the voicemail, I could no longer pretend I was imagining things. The sky was the color of pewter when I stepped out of the truck. Mist clung low to the ground, coiling around my boots as I walked the narrow plank path that cut through the marsh. Each step creaked, damp with groaning under my weight. I'd been out here before years ago, helping Clara haul equipment before her grant came through. Back then, everything smelled of brine and promise. Now it smelled of something else. Distance. Rot. A truth just beneath the surface. The station sat on a rise, a modest structure built on stilts to weather the spring floods. One window glowed faintly yellow light against the gray morning. I crouched behind the storage shed, its aluminum siding cool with dew. From there, I could just make out their voices through the slatted vent, Clara and another man. "It's not just about the data," he was saying, voice low and amused. "It's about the chemistry. You can't fabricate that." Clara laughed. That soft, warm laugh I hadn't heard in months. A sound I thought was mine. I moved closer, crouching low to peer through the dirty window. They stood near her workstation, heads bent over one of my charts. My chart, marked up with highlighters and post-its. His hand brushed her back as he leaned closer, and she didn't flinch. If anything, she leaned in. He pointed to a cove I'd named after her. She smiled. I looked away. That chart, I'd drawn it last year. I remembered every line, every depth sound. She'd asked for it, said it helped her track barnacle migration. I never imagined it'd help her track a lie. Inside Nathan, he had to be Nathan, reached for a frame on the desk. I recognized it before the light hit the glass, a photo from last year's marine biology conference in Vancouver. Clara had flown out alone. I'd encouraged her, told her she deserved it, even though I missed her the moment she left. In the picture, she and Nathan were shoulder to shoulder, wine glasses in hand, grinning like old friends. The timestamp was clear in the corner, August 2024. Almost a year ago. A full year of deception, wrapped inside a trip I'd supported, encouraged, even celebrate it. Something cracked quietly inside me. Not a break, more like a slow shift, the kind that changes a coastline over time. I sank to my knees, the mud soaking into my jeans. My breath came shallow, my hands trembling with a cold that had nothing to do with the air. I stayed there for a while, long enough to hear them leave, her laughter trailing behind them like a ribbon. When their voices finally faded into the mist, I stood. My hands were dirty. So was the hem of my coat. But I felt oddly still. I didn't storm in. Didn't call her. That's not how I'm wired. Mapping requires patience, observation. You study the contours, the changes in current. Then, when the tide turns, you move. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cold, salt air numb my face. Back at the cottage, I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the walls that had heard so much already. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the worn wood grain, fingers resting on the compass. The voicemail still echoed in my head. He doesn't suspect anything, except now I did. And then, as if drawn by some invisible line, I walked into Clara's office and opened her field notebook. She'd left it half-tucked under a stack of journals, as if she still trusted that I wouldn't look. That I couldn't. Her handwriting curled across the margins. Little thoughts, reminders, names. And in the back, a date circled in red, July 14th. A star beside it. Below, in tiny script, final plan confirmed. My heart thudded once hard. What plan? They were going somewhere. Together. A wave of nausea passed through me. The betrayal wasn't just in the body. It was in every part of our shared life. She was planning something. Not just a secret. A future I wasn't part of. I closed the notebook gently, like placing a stone on a grave. Outside, the sky had cleared, casting a golden wash over the dunes. The sea whispered against the rocks, steady as breath. There was a kind of honor, I realized, in clarity, in seeing things as they were, not as I hoped they might still be. I'd spent years learning to read the world, to chart what couldn't be seen from shore. But I'd failed to read the one map that mattered most. Our life. Now it was time to confront her. But I wouldn't do it in anger. I owed myself more than that. As I poured a glass of water, the phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Jonah. You should know something about this Nathan guy. Let's talk. I stared at the screen. Even now, it seemed the tides were still shifting. I waited until the tide had gone out. There's something about low tide that reveals the truth. Rocks that looked smooth from the bluff turned jagged up close. What the water hides, the air exposes. That night, it was just past 9 p.m. when Clara's car pulled into the gravel driveway. Her headlights cut through the mist, throwing long shadows across the porch railing where I stood, arms folded. She didn't see me at first. The engine went quiet. The door creaked open. I could hear her heels crunching softly across the shell-lined path, the familiar jingle of her keys as she approached the door. When she looked up and saw me, she froze. Elias, she said, you scared me. I waited, I replied. Thought we should talk. Inside, the cottage felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the damp air, or maybe it was what I now knew hanging between us. The smell of brine and burnt coffee lingered from that morning. Clara walked slowly to the kitchen table and set her bag down. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a thin golden glow across the worn oak. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Is this about work? Or Nathan? A flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise? Guilt? Hard to say. She glanced away, then back at me, steadying her voice. What about him? I pulled her field notebook from my jacket and placed it gently on the table. Her eyes dropped to it. No reaction. I reached into the pocket again and laid down the photo from Vancouver. Then the voicemail still queued up on my phone. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. Her shoulders dropped. She sat, quietly, almost gratefully, as if she was tired of holding it all in. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It started after Vancouver. We've been distant. You were always working late, buried in charts. And I fell into someone else's arms." My voice cracked slightly, not from anger, but from exhaustion. I felt alone, Elias. Like I didn't exist unless I brought back data. You stopped looking at me the way you used to, and you never thought to say anything. Before the field trips, before the lies, before that laugh you now share with someone else. She winced. "I didn't know how." "That's the thing, Clara," I said quietly. "You did know how. You just chose not to." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of every memory we'd ever built. Picnics on the cliffside. The time we painted the bedroom and ended up with more blue on ourselves than the walls. The little glass whale she gave me after my first chart got published. Every one of those things, echoing off the walls like ghosts. Then she said it. The thing I hadn't prepared for. "I'm pregnant." The room stilled. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I don't know if it's yours," she added. "I wish I did." I stepped back, not because I was afraid, because I didn't know what to feel. My hand found the edge of the chair beside me, gripping it for balance. The floor beneath felt like it was shifting, like a chart whose depths had changed overnight. "You redrew our map," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And you didn't even tell me you changed the landmarks." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking, not with sobs, but with the tremor of someone finally crumbling under their own decisions. I sat across from her, not because I wanted to be close, but because my knees no longer trusted themselves. The old oak table between us had been where we'd celebrated birthdays, shared seafood chowder on rainy nights, and planned trips we never took. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't," I said. "Not now." My mind was reeling, not just from her confession, but from what it meant. If the child wasn't mine, what then? And if it was, did that tether me to a life already fractured beyond repair? The words of Jonah echoed in my head. What you don't chart can still wreck you. I looked at her again, really looked at her. Her eyes were red, her hair wind-tossed. She looked older than she had a month ago. But there was something else, too. A flicker of the woman I'd once loved more than anything. "I'm not going to yell," I said slowly. "I won't call you names. That's not who I am. But I need you to understand something." She met my eyes. "I'm not just grieving the betrayal. I'm grieving the version of you that I thought still existed. The one I believed in." Her mouth opened to respond, but I held up a hand. "I need air." I stood, grabbed my coat from the hook, and stepped out into the night. The stars were bright, sharper than usual. The sea lapped gently at the rocks. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the salt, the cold, the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jonah. "Met someone who knew Nathan back in Boston. You'll want to hear this." I stared out toward the dark horizon. Apparently, some maps still had more to reveal. I drove until the road ended. Not metaphorically, literally. Past the lobster shacks and the weather-beaten cottages, up through the wind-swept bluffs where the pavement gives way to gravel and then to dirt, and finally to the overlook. The place where I once proposed to Clara, beneath a spray of stars, our hands cold from the wind and our futures warm with promise. Now the wind howled louder. I stepped out of the truck and onto the rocky path. The cliffside stretched out before me, the Atlantic pulling against the horizon like it was trying to drag the past with it. I sat on the flat boulder we used to call our bench, the cold biting through my coat. The sea was restless tonight, all foam and churn. Fitting. I pulled my sketch pad from the passenger seat, the same one I'd used last week to revise harbor depth lines. I didn't even realize I'd grabbed it until I felt it in my hand. I opened to a fresh page and just stared. Not at the ocean or the blank sheet, but at everything in between. The space where we used to be. It's strange, the grief that follows betrayal. It doesn't come all at once. It creeps in tidal, never asking permission. One moment, you're charting the world with certainty, and the next, you can't even trust the shoreline. That night after Clara's confession, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my father's old armchair, the one that still smelled of pipe smoke and cedar, staring into the dark. Her words looped endlessly in my mind. I'm pregnant. I don't know whose it is. I thought of the years we'd built together, the dinners, the repairs, the silent comfort of two people who didn't need to fill the room with talk. I thought of the laughter that once came easy, and the quiet nights when I traced the shape of her shoulder beneath the sheets like it was the coastline of a place only I knew. And yet I hadn't seen this coming. Or maybe I had, and chose not to map it. The wind picked up again, tugging at the edges of the page. I pressed it down with a pebble and began to draw, not the sea, but lines, currents, paths. I wasn't thinking, just letting the pencil move. But when I looked down, I saw that I'd drawn the cottage, alone on the bluff, and I wasn't inside it. Later that morning, I stopped by Jonah's shop. The tide was low, revealing dark seaweed clinging to the dock pylons like forgotten regrets. The bell over the door rang softly as I entered. The familiar scent, bait, wet rope, a faint hint of old coffee, wrapped around me like a rough wool blanket. Jonah looked up from the counter where he was gutting a fish. You look like you've been run aground. I hit a reef, I said. He wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward the stool across from him. I sat. She told me, I said, about Nathan and the pregnancy. He didn't flinch. She say it's his? She said she doesn't know. Jonah let out a low whistle, not of surprise, but sympathy. He reached below the counter and pulled out 2 paper cups, poured coffee from the dented thermos. It tasted like scorched wood in despair. You know, he said after a moment, my Eleanor, she stepped out once. Long ago. It wasn't just the act that hurt. It was how quiet it happened. Like I'd been erased without ever being told. I looked at him. What did you do? Took time. Thought I'd leave. Even packed a bag. But I realized something. I had to decide not out of anger, but out of what kind of man I wanted to be. Forgiveness isn't weakness, Elias. And leaving doesn't make you cold. It's about clarity. I nodded slowly. I'm not sure which one I am yet. He tilted his head. Well, what do you need to be? That stuck with me. When I returned home that afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen, washing a glass with absent-minded repetition. She looked up, startled by the sound of the door. I thought you weren't coming back. I needed time, I said. I walked past her, into the bedroom, pulled out the old duffel bag, the one we'd taken to Acadia on our first anniversary. I filled it with just what I needed, clothes, compass, sketch pad. I left the wedding photo on the dresser where she'd placed it last spring, after dusting. She stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. I paused. Clara, I loved you in a way that made sense to me. But I don't know who I am in this version of us anymore. Her eyes glistened. So that's it. No, that's the beginning of something different. I don't know what yet, but I need space to find out. Alone. I left a note on the table, short and even. You changed the coordinates. I'm adjusting course. Then I drove. Not away from her, but toward myself. Now I'm staying in a rented room above the old sailmaker's shop near the harbor. It's modest. 1 window, 1 chair, 1 bed. But there's peace here. The smell of tarred rope. The creak of boats in the water below. Every morning, I walk down to the docks, sketch the coastline, breathe the sea air. Last night, I received a voicemail from Clara. I've told Nathan. He's not staying in the picture. I'm sorry for all of it. Truly. I don't expect anything, but I thought you should know. Her voice sounded smaller. Warren, I haven't called back, but I might. One day. Because even maps drawn in pain can still lead to something worth finding. A knock came just after noon. I opened the door and found Jonah holding a manila envelope. "You asked about Nathan," he said. I nodded. He handed me the file. "Turns out you weren't the first husband he got close to." My fingers tightened around the envelope. Apparently, the tide hadn't fully turned just yet. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with thunder or revelation. It arrives in small, quiet ways: a morning without ache, a breath that doesn't catch, a moment when the past feels like memory instead of weight. I've been living above the sailmaker's shop for 6 months now. The room's no bigger than the chart table back at the cottage, but it's enough. The window faces the harbor, and in the mornings, I can hear the gulls bicker over scraps and the clink of masts knocking gently in the wind. The smell of tarred rope and coffee from the shop below mixes with salt air. Some might find it harsh. I find it honest. The first few weeks were the hardest. Not because I missed Clara, though I did, but because everything felt unmoored. Like I was drifting without a map. I spent my life tracing coastlines, interpreting tide shifts, reading meaning in the shape of sandbars. But nothing had prepared me for the stillness that follows a betrayal. Not silence, but the kind of quiet that asks you to start over. I kept busy. Redrew old charts, corrected minor errors I'd long ignored, took odd cartography commissions, one for a yacht club, another for a local museum. It wasn't glamorous, but it grounded me. The lines steadied my hand. The precision soothed me. Then, one morning, I received an email from the Newberry Maritime Museum. They were curating an exhibit on historical trade routes and had come across one of my older nautical charts. Said it was beautifully rendered, full of artistic interpretation, asked if I'd be willing to submit a new piece, something original, something personal. At first, I hesitated. My work had always been functional, lived in the margins of necessity. But something about their request stayed with me. I began to sketch late into the night, using my father's compass and a straight edge Clara once gifted me. I didn't redraw any coastline I'd mapped before. Instead, I created a fictional one, an imagined archipelago, a map of resilience. The islands formed a loose ring, with a single deep channel leading to the center. I named it Haven's Reach. It wasn't real, but it told the truth. When the museum unveiled it last month, I stood off to the side, a small plastic cup of cider in hand. People murmured, tracing the intricate topography, pointing out the tiny names I'd penned in the corner of each islet: Patience Bay, Compass Point, Line Break Cove. A woman stood beside me for a while, quiet. "You created this?" she asked. I nodded. "It feels like something lived in," she said. "Like a place someone came back from." That woman was Sarah. She's the museum's curator. Early 40s, quick to laugh and passionate about maritime history. We've had coffee a few times since. Nothing more. Just something beginning to stir, like wind before a tide shift. A cautious friendship, warm but unhurried. And I find I look forward to hearing her voice. But recovery isn't linear. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from Clara. A real one. Not a text. Not an email. It was brief. Apologetic. She wrote that she's raising the child alone. Nathan disappeared not long after the lab scandal broke. She didn't ask for anything. Just said she hoped I'd found peace, and that if I ever wanted to talk, she'd listen. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I didn't know what to say. My silence wasn't anger. It was acceptance. Still, that night the past pulled at me. I walked along the wharf long after dark, past the shuttered fish stalls and rusted lobster cages, until I reached the bluff. From there, I could see the old cottage, a dim outline across the bay. A foghorn groaned somewhere offshore. I sat on a bench, pulled my coat tighter, and stared at the horizon. That's when I realized something. Some maps are meant to be redrawn, not erased, not discarded, but revised. noted with corrections, with lessons. The next morning, I accepted an invitation from Sarah to attend the Maritime Festival with her. Just as friends, she said. She didn't push for more. That kindness meant everything. As I was lacing up my boots before heading out, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Clara. Elias, I know this is unexpected. I just thought you should hear this from me. There's something else about Nathan. About the lab. It might not matter anymore, but I think it should. For both our sakes. She didn't elaborate. Just said she'd be at the festival. I sat there for a long moment, the voicemail echoing in my ear. The festival music already faint in the distance, accordion notes riding the wind, mixing with laughter and the scent of fried clams. Maybe it didn't matter. But maybe it did. I grabbed my coat, picked up the small envelope Jonah had given me months ago, the one I never opened. A year passed, almost to the day. The town's Maritime Festival had returned. Same tents, same smells of fried clams and salt air, same children running barefoot past booths strung with ship lanterns. But everything felt different. Maybe because I was different. Sarah and I walked the boardwalk just after dusk, warm cider in hand. A soft breeze blew in off the harbor, carrying the low hum of sea shanties from a nearby folk band. Paper lanterns bobbed overhead like tethered stars, their glow reflecting in the calm water. She pointed out a vendor carving scrimshaw. He does all the historic replicas for the museum's whaling exhibit, she said. You'd love his detail work. I nodded, but my attention drifted. Across the crowd, through the blur of voices and music, I spotted her. Clara stood alone near the edge of the harbor wall, hands wrapped around a paper cup. Her hair was shorter now, wind-tousled and loose. She wore the same olive coat I remember from years ago, back when we'd hiked tide pools together in silence, mapping shells and sunlight. I didn't feel bitterness, just something quieter, like watching the tide roll out and knowing you don't need to chase it anymore. Sarah followed my gaze. That her? I nodded. Do you want to talk to her? I'm not sure, I said, but I think I should. Sarah gave a soft smile. I'll meet you by the bandstand. Clara noticed me as I approached. She straightened, offered a small, guarded smile. Elias, she said. Clara. For a moment, we stood in silence, just listening to the creak of the dock ropes, the murmur of the crowd behind us. The smell of seaweed and kettle corn hung in the air, strange and familiar all at once. You look well, she said. I am. She nodded. I've followed your charts. That museum piece was beautiful. Thank you. Her voice lowered. I wanted to tell you something. Not to reopen things. Just because I thought you deserved to know. I waited. She looked down at her cup, then back at me. Nathan lost his tenure. After the investigation, it turned out he'd been falsifying data for years on multiple projects, mine included. I didn't know until it was too late. I said nothing. I lost my grant. Had to leave the coastal lab. I'm working now at a small teaching college upstate. It's quiet, honest work. Her eyes didn't plead for sympathy. She wasn't trying to win anything back, just sharing a hard truth plainly the way we used to. What happened to him? I asked. He left. Not just the lab, the state. I haven't heard from him in months. She swallowed. The child's mine. Only mine. A long pause settled between us. I'm not the same person I was, she added quietly. Neither am I. She looked out toward the horizon, where the last light touched the waves in fading streaks of gold. Do you ever think about what we had? All the time, I said. But I don't miss it anymore. She turned to face me fully. I'm glad you're okay, Elias. Really. And strangely, I believed her. I hope you find peace, Clara, I said, in whatever harbor you land. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but something softer. Gratitude, maybe. Then she gave me a small nod, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the waves. When I rejoined Sarah, she didn't ask what was said. She just handed me a warm pastry wrapped in wax paper and nudged me toward a bench overlooking the harbor. "You okay?" she asked. I exhaled. "Yeah, I think I finally am." These days, I teach cartography part-time at the local maritime college. Nothing formal, just workshops in the evenings, mostly for veterans and late bloomers. People who want to chart something real after years of drifting. I still draw, still listen to the sea. But the lines I trace now are less about navigation and more about meaning. I've come to believe that maps don't just show you where to go. They show you who you've become. One of my students, a single father rebuilding his life after deployment, asked me recently, "How do you know when a map's finished?" I thought for a moment and said, "You don't. But eventually, you trust that you've drawn enough to move forward." Tonight, the tide is coming in. The harbor outside my window glows with lantern light, and Sarah is downstairs, poring over maritime records for an exhibit we're curating together. I stand at my drafting table, chart in hand, compass steady, pencil poised above clean parchment. I trace the first line. It's bold, certain. The stars above the harbor flicker gently in the salt air, like a constellation unfolding just for me. Maps don't erase old paths. They just show new ones. And for the first time in a long time, I like where this one is going.